Welcome back. Now, in a moment, we'll be finding out about new technology to help the deaf and hard of hearing. But first, here are some other stories to keep an eye on. World leaders have shown solidarity and support for Britain following a terror attack in Westminster, which left at least 4 people dead and many more injured. The White House has pledged the full support of the US government in responding to the attack. South Korean officials have raised the sunken Seawall ferry 3 years after the disaster that killed more than 300 people. Almost all of the victims were school children. Hundreds of salvage operators are involved in the effort to recover the dead. And dozens of people have died in Peru after the worst flooding in almost 30 years. A state of emergency has been declared across most of the country, and at least 100,000 people have been left homeless. The government has sent in the armed forces to support search and rescue teams. Now, in a few months, Turkey will host the Deaflympics. Around 3,000 deaf athletes from around the world will compete across 21 sports. The World Health Organization estimates globally 360 million people are living with disabling hearing loss. But as technology develops, so does the range and quality of treatment. Insight's Chloe Kulpan reports.
It's almost unnoticeable, but this sporty 16-year-old was born profoundly deaf. At 14 months old, Jodie Ounsley was one of the youngest people in the world to have a cochlear implant fitted. Now, the only sign of her disability is the small device by her ear.
I don't think it's been a big problem. I think it's a good way to send a message out to other people with hearing disabilities that you can do any sport.
Jodie is training hard for the Deaflympics, which are sanctioned by the International Olympic Committee. She'll compete in the 100 and 200 metre sprints. The events are the same as the Olympics, but Deaflympians cannot be guided by sound, like a starter gun.
Everyone has to take the hearing aids off or implants or anything like that, so it's fair. And then we use a traffic light system, so it goes from red to orange to green, and that's when you set off.
Jodie is one of hundreds of thousands of people with a cochlear implant. It works by bypassing damaged parts of the ear to directly stimulate the auditory nerve.
The sound comes in through the microphone at the top and it's made into a digital signal.
Jane Martin heads up the auditory implant service which fitted Jodie's implant.
It's not normal hearing. They will have some loss of hearing, maybe a mild to moderate loss, but they will hear across the frequency range, going from very low sounds to very high sounds like consonants, like sh and s. They can hear them, but at first they will just sound very different. If they've heard before, it'll sound very different to how they've heard. Certainly if they're young children, it's something that they have to learn to use.
The implants themselves have greatly improved since they were introduced in the 1980s. They're noticeably smaller and can last much longer.
They're changing all the time, and the power capabilities of batteries is improving all the time. So they're able to wear them for longer with the power keeping going before it runs out.
Hearing aids are also improving. A record 3.65 million were sold in the US last year, up 8% on 2015. But the World Health Organization estimates as much as 60% of childhood hearing loss is due to preventable causes. It's now working with charities to run projects around the world to educate people about the dangers of noise. The WHO believes internationally 1.1 billion young people risk damaging their hearing by exposure to noise in recreational settings. And while there are options available for people suffering hearing loss, whether it's genetic or caused by the environment, there's no doubt that prevention is better than cure. Chloe Kulpan reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined by Azhar Shaider, who's a consultant ENT surgeon specialising in cochlear implants and auditory implants at the Royal National Throat, Nose and Ear Hospital in London. Also with us is Emma Judge, who's the Chief Executive Officer at the charity Sound Seekers, which specialises in helping people with hearing loss in the developing world. Both of you, welcome to the programme. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Azhar, let me start with you, because you work with this kind of technology which is available to help restore hearing. And we've seen some quite incredible incredible advances, haven't we?
Yes, we've seen a clip about cochlear implants, and cochlear implants have been one of the success stories of the last 30 years. And initially it started out as a research project, then became available as a recognized technology for adults, then for children, and we're now at the stage where it's a routine part of our ENT armamentarium for dealing with severe to profound hearing loss.
And it's fair to say that that piece of technology has helped many children and adults regain normal lives.
Yes, so in the UK, for example, there are about 12,000 cochlear implant recipients. Every year we estimate about 450 children and about 750 adults will need a cochlear implant. So the number of recipients will be increasing rapidly.
Emma, you work with some of the poorest communities in Africa. I'm guessing that the figures aren't similar at all when we're talking about resources available to people who have hearing problems in those kind of areas.
Well, if I can give you an example, in Malawi there are only two ENT surgeons in the country, and until recently there were no audiologists. Soundseek has recently trained 2 Malawians to become the first ever audiologists. And the interesting thing is that the 360 million people with hearing loss that WHO quotes, 2/3 of them live in developing countries. So in a population of 17 million, you've got a very poorly resourced service.
And it must be comparatively expensive in those areas to have an operation like, as I was describing, routine here, but not routine there. I'm guessing that only the richer people of those communities could have a cochlear implant unless there's some kind of aid program.
Yeah, the cochlear implants that have taken place in Malawi have been through a charitable service. Yeah.
What about support, educational support and sign language, those sort of supportive assistance for people who have hearing problems?
Yeah. Soundseekers works holistically, so we consider the identification, treatment, prevention, and also ensuring access to inclusive education. So one of the challenges in Africa is that children who are deaf are often excluded from school because teachers don't understand that the issue is the hearing as opposed to anything else. So we work hard to train mainstream teachers in deaf awareness. We also ensure that children who are being fitted and treated, there's a connection between the schools so that they get the follow-up support services, as you say, that they need.
One of the fascinating things about the statistics is that a lot of cases of deafness, I know there are many causes, but a lot of cases can be prevented.
Yes, so there are certain things, for example, ototoxic drugs that you may receive in hospital, reaction to chemotherapy and radiotherapy, and obviously the big one is noise exposure.
I was going to say, that is must be one of the big everyday things. We see people all over the place wearing headphones, noise-cancelling headphones, and those little earbuds that they jam right down into their ears. They must cause huge problems.
Well, I think they do, and in the EU, well, while we're still part of the EU, we're subject to regulations which limit the output from the earpieces, but there are lots of grey imports and people don't always stick to the approved volumes. So I think exposure to loud clubs and concerts, prolonged exposure to loud volumes heard through earphones will be a contributory factor to hearing loss.
Do you think people know that? Do you think people are aware, particularly young people? I mean, my daughter wears headphones all the time.
I think they're vaguely aware of it, but it's something that will be put back to the future at some stage. And
yeah, when they come to see you.
Yes. Yes.
Prevention is a big part of what you do as well.
Yes, that's right. I mean, for us, we see a lot of children and adults who come in having had hearing loss as a result of malaria and or its treatment, from meningitis, also the drugs that treat AIDS, TB, all cause hearing loss. As you said, the cotton buds. In fact, recently I was in the Gambia and we were told that the cotton buds were sold with the baby bath. So mothers think that it is part of the care that goes with the baby. So it's sort of working on prevention campaigns to ensure that the awareness is there as to put nothing, they say put nothing in your ear and smaller than your elbow.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
You're clearly doing some very important work there. Azar, do you see a time when deafness just won't be as much of a problem as it is today because the technology is becoming so widespread and so routine?
I think we have some way to go. The technology is advancing. Even with current technology in the first world, there are limitations. So with a cochlear implant, for example, we can get people back to conversing, but there are limitations. So people with a cochlear implant will struggle in the presence of background noise. They will often struggle to use the telephone. They will struggle to enjoy music. So there is some way to go on that. And then the technology is slowly filtering out into the lesser developed parts of the world. But cost is going to be a big issue, and it's something that we really need to work on.
Do you think people, governments around the world, do you think they see it adequately as a big problem that needs to be addressed as a priority?
I'm really pleased you've asked that question, actually, because the World Health Assembly are convening in Geneva in May, and for the first time in 25 years, hearing loss is being proposed as being part of the global health agenda, because currently it isn't. So people can actually lobby their governments to make sure that it becomes part of the world health agenda, because at the moment, certainly in terms of what people discuss, they talk about malaria and it being fatal, but they don't talk about people who survive for Ebola. They talk about survivors of Ebola. Many of them have got ear and hearing complications, and again, that's not something that's talked about. So for us, if we can get to hearing loss to be on the global health agenda, which if it's supported globally for the World Health Assembly in May, that would be a great start.
Let's hope that that is what happens. Emma, Azhar, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, we end our programme with our Insight Bite, a little something we feel you should know. The debate on whether Pluto is a planet has been reignited this week at an international conference. Scientists from America want to restore Pluto to full planet status after it was declassified to a dwarf planet over 10 years ago. The decision left the solar system with just 8 planets. In a paper presented at the International Planetary Conference, scientists argue that geological properties such as shape and surface features should determine what constitutes a planet. The group wants to create a sub-classification system, and that would categorise Earth's moon as a type of planet, along with Pluto and around 110 other bodies in the solar system. And that's it for now. I'm Shuli Ghosh. That was Insight.